Alright guys, welcome back to part 2. So in this video, the goals are going to be to make the low poly. So we're going to decimate the current one down. We also need to triangulate, and then we're going to unwrap the model. And then in part 3, that's when we should kind of finalize everything. It'll be a quick video. So there are a few things we need to consider. In the last video, what we made was the high poly. We had a lot of bevel segments, we had all this detail in here, and a lot of this detail is not required in the final product. For example, for one, the low poly doesn't need this many segments on the bevel. It could probably use like 3 to 5, doesn't need that many. Probably use like 5 or something. And also on flat surfaces, and like in this particular case, we can easily bake this detail. These screws we could bake. It doesn't have to be actual geo or anything. So that's probably what we're going to end up doing. So without further ado, let's create the low poly from this high poly. It'll be really easy. So the first thing I'd recommend doing is making a backup just in case you mess anything up. You can just have a backup copy. I use PowerSave. It's a free add-on. Otherwise, you can just use the file save copy option or save as, whatever you want to do. Okay, so what we need to do is kind of organize the scene first. The first thing I want to do is make a low poly and a high poly collection. So we're going to make a new collection. Right click new collection, call this high, and then call this one low. If it gets like set inside the other collection, just drag it out like that, you'll be fine. Okay, so right now we only have the high poly object, so we're going to press the M key and move these one by one to the high poly collection. We can even turn off this collection to make sure we don't miss anything. So M, high, there we go. We'll just turn this back on, and now you're going to see we have access to the high and the low poly versions to kind of separate them. Alright, so next thing we need to do is, let me think. Okay, so what I want to do is first of all apply all of our booleans. It looks like we already have the booleans applied on this one, but on this one we have to apply this boolean and the little bolt boolean, so we'll apply both of those. We'll also apply the mirror modifier because we're done with that. And we're not going to apply the bevels. You do not need to ever apply the bevels, really. There's no need. You can, you just don't need to. And the reason I don't like to is because sometimes I want to come back in here and make adjustments to the size of the bevel. So, you know, I might want to make it bigger or smaller, and I want to make sure I still have that bevel modifier available to me. It's only in specific situations where you might want to apply the bevel. I really haven't run into that many. So the general guideline is for game assets where you're going with the bevel workflow, you do not need to apply the bevel. So if you run into a weird case where it might help, by all means. In most cases, you don't need to. So we have that, and we're basically ready to create the low poly from this piece. So what I want to do is I want to duplicate the space. We could actually rename these. We could do like base and then top like that. And what I want to do is duplicate both of these. Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel, and then M, move it to the low poly collection. And now we can kind of turn on and off the high poly and the low poly collection. So this is going to be our low poly collection here. The reason I didn't move the screws to this collection is because we're going to bake the screw detail, and you'll see how we'll do that in a little bit. For now, we only need these two. So this isn't a low poly yet. We have to, of course, make this into a low poly. So the first thing you need to do is turn the bevel segments down to about, we'll do 1. And let me show you why we're going to do that. So if I go to, let's see, statistics, you're going to see up here, I'll press Shift H and then you'll see the true statistics, jeez. And I studied math and I still can't pronounce that right. Triangles, you're going to see we have about 6,000 in here, and you're going to see if we turn this down to 1, we have about 3,000, and if we turn the bevel off completely, that takes us down to 1,700. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I prefer to use 1 segment bevels because it just adds a little bit of extra. It does make the poly count a bit higher, but most modern graphics cards can easily handle a bit higher poly count. We're not going to worry too much about that. But if you don't want to use a bevel at all, you do not have to. I prefer to use a 1 segment bevel because it does look a bit cleaner, and honestly you can't really see much of a difference between the 3 segments and the 1 segment, so I always turn it down to 1. But if you have strict requirements, maybe you're in a company and you can like barely use any polygons, then I would recommend just removing the bevel completely. It won't kill anything. And in that case, it's probably a super low poly game anyways. So yeah, in this case, I'm going to leave it because I like it. And the next thing I need to do is bring this one back. We'll press Alt-H. Same for this one. We're going to do 1 segment. Okay, cool. So that's like the number 1 thing you can do to drop the poly count a bit. Now the next thing we can do is make the bevels a little bit lower poly. For example, I'm going to hold Alt and Shift and just select these and press Control X, and you're going to see we don't really need all those segments. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. We can dissolve out every other edge here and have close to the same type of result while still removing a lot of extra geometry. So we're going to do that, and you know, you could have prepared this beforehand if you wanted to. It just depends on your workflow. It's just easier for me to go back in here and do it manually. I always like to have quality in what I create, but of course if you have if you're on a time constraint, you might want to consider how you can speed up the efficiency beforehand. But you know, in this case it's really easy. Dissolve those out and you're good to go. I'm not going to do any of the other sides because I can simply run a mirror. So we could run a mirror, or we could just symmetrize. It's going to do precisely the same thing. So I'm going to do mirror, and we're going to do X, Y, and then just bisect and flip them. And we'll just apply the mirror right away. And you're going to see it kind of took care of all these other sides for us, and we don't have to deal with those. So that's good. And I probably should have done this side too. I forgot. Alt-Shift-Click and take care of these. Control X, let me run the mirror 1 more time. I apologize. And then apply the mirror. And now you're going to see we have a much lower poly version here. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing to the top. We're going to, okay, first of all, we don't need these holes right here at all because we're going to bake this detail. On flat surfaces, you can almost always bake Boolean detail. If you were to just bake these holes and nothing else, in this case we're also going to have the screw getting baked, so it'll work fine. But if you were just to bake a hole going straight through the mesh with no bottom, it would have this infinite like bake and it looks really weird. But since we're going to actually be baking this screw detail as well, we can completely get rid of this hole right here. We don't need it. And this is going to save a lot of poly count because look at all those vertices multiplied by 4. That's going to save a lot of time. So real quick, let me just dissolve these, make that a bit lower poly, and then to get rid of this area is super easy. All we need to do is select these 2 faces, press the X key, and then delete faces. And don't worry about this, it's just some Z fighting because these occupy this face, and this face basically occupy the same surface. After we do that, I want to press the L key. Okay, that didn't take care of that part. Actually, instead, let's go ahead and undo that. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into wireframe with the Z key. I'm going to go into vertex mode and then use the circle tool. We'll press C to activate that. Paint those vertices and then basically press X vertices and get rid of it that way. And that's going to take care of that, no problem. And we also have like an extra edge right here. You can also press / on the number pad to isolate the view. It might be easier that way. I'm going to press Control X to dissolve that one out. And let's just let's basically just patch this up. We'll hold the Alt key, press F, and then we also got this area down here deleted. Let's patch that up, hold the Alt key, and press F. And we're just going to run a mirror modifier again to take care of the other side. So we'll just do, you could bisect and flip if you wanted to. We're going to do that, apply it, and now you're going to see we have a completely flat surface now. Now we don't actually need these edges here, so Alt-Shift-Click and Control X to dissolve those out. So now we have a really low poly version right here. If we were to go into this panel, you're going to see we have 108 tries, but that calculates it without the bevel. In reality, with the bevel, this one has 236 tries. Now we're just going to go back into global view / on the numpad. Okay. So at this point we have the lowest poly we can basically achieve here. There's not too much left we could do. We could actually delete out the bottom because this will probably be sitting on the floor somewhere. So X, delete faces, we could get rid of that. not really a need to keep it. And yeah, that should be fine. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is check for any shading issues. Now we do have a shading issue right here, and you probably can't see it, but if I go into matcap, you can definitely see how there's a nasty shading warp right here. And the best way to fix that is to, instead of using the hard to normals option, you can instead use the weighted normal option. It's a bit more accurate. Make sure you do it on both. So I'll do it for this one, and I'll also do it for this one. Don't use hard to normals and weighted normals together. It's they work weird together. I don't know why. Turn the hard to normals off and turn weighted normal on instead. And you're going to see that actually fixes the shading issue. And we're going to go back into Studio View. And you know, if it looks good here and it looks good in matcap, you can basically be assured that your shading's fine. Okay, so good shading, low poly, we're basically set. That's exactly what we want. Now the next step is triangulating. If you're new to this workflow, a lot of you might be thinking, what about quads? Don't I need, because you've probably been taught quads everywhere you go on YouTube, and quads have their place. There are situations in which I would prefer using quads in a subsurf workflow over this workflow. There's pros and cons to both. The fact of the matter is, you do not need to use quads everywhere in game assets. This is the lie of the century. The only time you need those is one, if you're animating, deforming, VFX, you're sculpting. These are all situations in which you simply need to use that quad workflow. It's essential. For a static hard surface game asset, you don't. It's not necessary. It's oftentimes more tedious and longer. And our goal is to create the coolest looking game asset in the shortest amount of time. So I'm going to show you the proper way to handle these engons. So what you want to do, you don't want to ever just leave engons sitting, because what happens, for example, if I bring this into Marmoset, the baking software, Marmoset is going to triangulate this mesh behind the scenes. And oftentimes the triangulation algorithms are subpar and they cause distortions. Let me show you. So if I select everything and press Control T, you're going to see we have this kind of like ping pong effect, like I like to call it. And sometimes this effect causes really nasty shading. For one, I don't know how well you can see it, but it does cause nasty shading. Two, and this is where it won't actually work for game assets, is where it causes artifacts. And artifacts are those effects where you basically have like these nasty overlaps the more you expand the bevel. Notice that. And oftentimes, different softwares have different triangulation algorithms, and it'll triangulate and in turn cause these artifacts, which can't display properly in a game engine. So what we need to do as the modeler here is make sure it's triangulated beforehand and working properly before we do anything else. And I have a really set way to do my triangulations. They're really easy to do. And basically what I try to do, if I don't have one, I just make one. But in general, I try to find a corner here. And I connect this into like a star formation into a corner. Now I use Mesh Machine, which is a paid add-on. I don't know if there's another add-on that has this option, but I use this option called Star Connect. Do I have it turned on? Maybe I don't. Maybe it's a hard ops function, but anyways, what I usually do is I use the Star Connect option, and that basically connects it like this. Now, if you're not using an add-on, you can simply come in here and we're going to press the J key. Make sure you don't press F because we want to actually join this. And you can do it this way. I'm pretty sure there's an add-on that does this that's free. I don't remember. Just post it in the comments if you remember. Worst case scenario, you basically go in here and you just connect this up manually. It's really easy. Just to speed up the tutorial here, what I am going to do is use this add-on just to make it a bit quicker. So we have that. You're going to see these triangulations even once we do that manually. If we go into matcap, let's check the shading. Yeah, you're going to see the shading is pretty much fine. There is a minor warp right here. I don't know if you can see it, but what I would recommend doing in that case is go into the bevel modifier, changing the face strength to affected, and then the weight of normal to face influence, and that's going to actually completely eradicate any shading error you have. So even with those triangulations, the shading's fine. So the nice thing about this triangulation is now if we press Control T, we won't get this area triangulated because we've already done it manually. It's like brute force basically. And we need to do the same thing over here for this area. We need to take care of that. So in a case like this, what I usually do is I just use the knife tool. I press the K key, click, C, Z, click again and press enter. And then what I can do is basically, you know, star connect this, and then star connect this. It's really easy stuff. And by the way, these connection points we made earlier, we no longer need because these are the new connection points. We don't need these. So Control X to dissolve those out. And we can also dissolve that one out and dissolve, we don't need to do that side. We'll just run a mirror later, but we can dissolve that one out as well. So pretty cool. Now we have a triangulation, and if we do any manual triangulations here, you're going to see it works a lot better. All right, so same thing for this area. We'll hit this one with a star connect, and then hit this area with a star connect as well. And you're going to see the triangulation is perfect, no issues at all. And at this point, what we can do is simply run a mirror to both sides. So let me add a mirror. We'll do X and Y and just do that flip option and apply it. And it looks like, nope, it's fine. Cool. There we go. So now we have the triangulations on basically all the sides here. No problems at all. And what else do we need to do? We could probably dissolve out these interior edges. We don't need those. Control X. And I'm also going to press / on the numpad to check the top. Okay, so now we need to triangulate the top. Another thing that will happen when you have beveled corners like this is sometimes Blender will do these like really long stretches, and in this case it was actually okay. But the way I prefer to take care of these types of effects is, first of all, we're just going to select this entire upper portion and press the F key. It's going to be one big n-gon. And then what I like to do is I like to connect these crisscross to each side, because what this will do is make a natural vertex to connect these two. And now if I press Control T, you're going to see we have a perfect triangulation here on the top as well, which is awesome. So I'm going to dissolve this area out. We don't need that. Going to make sure I save. And at this point, I think we're done with this piece. Now I've heard stories of people having issues with really long triangulations, and if that bothers you, what you can actually do is kind of like, notice how if I press Control T, the triangulation is all the way across. If you wanted to make this a bit more manageable, you could just leave these loop cuts in here with Control R, and then it's going to triangulate not as far. That might be a better idea. I've just heard some people having issues with the really long triangulations. I haven't personally, but you can do it that way if you want. And we're just going to keep checking. Is there anything else we need to take care of? I don't think so. All right, so at this point, I'm going to dissolve out this middle edge here. We don't need that. We're just going to check, is there anything left to dissolve out? I don't think there is, but it's always worth a double check. I don't think so. One problem we might have is right here. We should have probably kept this edge. So what I'm going to do is, notice how this triangulation is stretching. What we probably should have done right here is just connected this down. So I'm going to run a knife cut and then run a knife cut here as well. There we go. Okay, cool. So now we're ready to triangulate the entire thing. You could do this with a triangulate modifier to make it more non-destructive, so that way you don't have to keep pressing undo. So maybe what I'll do is go into wireframe in this menu and then add a triangulate modifier, and we'll do it that way. Let's turn off the wireframe, and also make sure the triangulation is the first in the stack there, so that way it triangulates and then runs the bevel in weighted normal. Okay, so there we go. We have a very nice triangulation in here behind the scenes, and this is going to be read just fine by game engines and baking, texturing, whatever. It's going to be just fine. So let's go ahead and check the poly count of this piece. Let's give it a look. So what I'm going to do is press Shift H to get a true perspective on that count. you're going to see 1,638 tries here, and if we were to turn off the triangulation, a bit lower, not by much. Usually it's not that much of a difference. And if we were to not use the bevel, you're going to see that's about 878 triangles. Very reasonable. Like I said, I prefer to use the bevels. They look cleaner, so I'm going to kind of make the poly count a bit higher. Alright, so that one's done. Now what we can do is hop over to this one right here. So we're going to take this piece and then we're going to basically do the same thing. This will be really easy. So first things first, what I want to do, this might be tricky. I don't know how that's going to triangulate, not very well. So for this area right here, I'm going to actually just run a knife cut. K, C, Z, click and press enter. Same for right here. And then maybe what I'll do is press the J key to join these two together. Like that. And yeah, we can just dissolve these out and do the same thing we did before. We're just going to join these up. And what I might actually do is use these points instead. Like that. And then if we press Control T, you're going to see we have a pretty clean triangulation here. We could make it a bit nicer on the bottom. So we're going to join that up. And yeah, looks good. I don't think there's any issues with this one. So let's drop on our triangulate modifier. We're going to make this at the top of the stack. And if we go into wireframe, you're going to see this is fine. No issues at all. Alright, so this piece is done. We don't have to do anything else here except unwrap the object. So the next thing we need to do is, well, you know what? We're going to do that in the next video. I'll leave it as a surprise. We have to do something with the high poly. Before this video ends, I do want to unwrap this object so that way we're going to stay on track. So the unwrapping process is really straightforward. I'm going to kind of go through it pretty quickly. If you want to learn more about the techniques of hard surface unwrapping, definitely more than I'll discuss right here, check out our mini course. It's the Essentials of UV Unwrapping. It's $10 on our Gumroad page. One of the best $10 you'll spend if you want to get into game asset stuff. I'd really recommend it. I'll link it in the description, so make sure you grab that. I'd recommend it, obviously, because we made the product, but it's good. It's good, I promise. But one thing I did forget to do, I forgot to add the affected face strength right here and turn on face influence to make sure these both have the same settings. Alright, cool. So finally, we're going to unwrap this thing. It's going to be a very straightforward process. So how I unwrap is a little bit unique. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have a material to preview our unwrap. So we're going to add a material, go to the shader editor, and inside the shader editor here, I want to add in an image texture. We're going to click on New. I'll make this like 4K. And we're just going to call this UV and make the generated type set to UV grid. And if we connect this to the base color, we can preview it. We can see the preview. Obviously, it's not going to look good because we haven't unwrapped anything yet. But what we can do is start marking our seams. So a quick and easy way to mark seams is to go up here to select and then select sharp edges and then just kind of adjust the angle threshold here until it kind of captures what you want. Let me go back into solid view. So I don't want to select this interior area. So Alt Shift click, we're going to remove that. And we're just going to have this area marked as a seam. Whoops. And yeah, just basically the sharp edges are what you want to mark as seams. And honestly, we don't even need this bottom area marked as a seam either because we don't have a face on the bottom. So I'm going to deselect this entire area here. Cool, okay. Looks good. So now what I want to do is I want to go into Material View, press Control E to mark the seam, and we're just going to go into the UV editor and press U and then unwrap. And once you press U and then unwrap, you should be able to see the preview right here. I'm going to actually click X so that way I can see it better. And we also want to make sure we set the method to conformal. Conformal is going to give us a bit of a better accuracy here. Now a few problems. The obvious one is we have these really nasty not shading, but whatever these things are, we have to take care of that. And most likely the reason that's occurring is because I see it. It looks like we got some extra areas marked with a seam that we don't want. And this usually happens sometimes, so we're just going to press Control E to clear those seams. Sometimes it just kind of captures edges that shouldn't be captured. So over here as well. If you can't really see it, just turn off the bevel and you'll be able to see it. I'm going to press Control E to clear that seam. Let's go ahead and unwrap that again. There, it's a bit better. Okay, cool. We still have to take care of this. This is a pretty big problem. And the reason is because we need to mark at least one seam up here on the top. So I'm going to go ahead, select this, and then basically select all the way to the back. So up to here. We need to have one, otherwise it's going to run in a loop like that. So we're going to press Control E and mark a seam there. We'll do the same thing for this side. We'll press Control E and mark a seam there. And then we'll do one more on this side. Control E and mark a seam right there. It might be hard to see on the screen. I apologize. Usually I'm using a wider screen, but for recording I have to go a bit smaller. So at this point we can unwrap it again, and you're going to see now we have a much cleaner result right here. This is going to map very nicely to our object. If we go into material view, you're going to see this is a pretty clean unwrap right here. Now what I'm going to do is, let's see, there's angle based. You're going to see angle based is a bit worse in my opinion. And then conformal is what I almost always use. So we have that. The margin is fine, I think. Yeah, that shouldn't cause any overlap. And yeah, if you wanted to split this area up right here, notice how it's kind of in a circle. What you could do is you could drop some seams. You could drop a seam right here. By the way, go to options and turn on live unwrap, so that way every time you mark a seam, it automatically unwraps it. So if you wanted this to be a bit less of a circular formation, you could go in here and mark these areas, which are going to cause some very visible seams, unfortunately, as you can see, but it will in result kind of isolate these islands a bit more. I'm personally not going to do that. I don't think it's worth it, just because those seams will look awful, but it is something you could do if you wanted to. So we have that. The only reason I actually would consider it is because I don't know how well this is going to actually pack these islands. We have a lot of wasted UV space here, which we, could fix up a little bit. So if I were to go up here to UV and then pack islands, Blender has a native packer and it does an okay job. I personally use UV Packmaster. It does a much better job, but in this case these islands are so just simple that it's not going to be able to pack too much extra data here. So what I would usually do, notice how we have all this extra space. Whenever I pack this, you can't see it, but we're only using about 50% of the UV space here. We could use a lot more. So at this point, I always suggest trying to split up these islands into little pieces as much as you can, because the more pieces, think about like a connected puzzle. Imagine the puzzle's connected together, glued together, and you tried to move it around. It'd be annoying if you wanted to like move it through a door, you'd have to like turn the puzzle. But if you separated all the puzzle pieces, you could just carry it in a box and move it anywhere. It's the same idea here. If you can split up these islands into smaller pieces, you can pack them more efficiently. So usually what I do is I mark seams in areas I can't actually see to kind of separate them more. One example would be in here. If I Alt-Shift-Click, what I could do is mark a seam in here, and that's going to separate them even further. Now you will have a visible seam on the inside, but no one's going to actually see the inside. And you're going to see, like, regardless, although the islands are a bit more optimized now, we have a lot more space being used. The textile density was already pretty good, so it just kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If we were to texture this in texturing software, the resolution is going to be really good already. But, there's always extra space you can use, so why not use it? It only takes you a few extra seconds, and I'd always recommend doing it. So we've done that. What else could we do? Probably not too much, since this one's really simple. Like I said, you could split these up additionally by let me go into edge mode, by marking seams on these areas. And you could do it that way, but it's just going to really make a problem with the seams. It's just not going to look good. So yeah, for that reason, I'm just going to leave it how it is. It's once again, it's a simple game asset tutorial, so I'm not going to bog you down. Another thing you could do, I guess you could perhaps, you know, keep cutting this up some more if you wanted to. Just drop seams in that area, but it's going to be like such a negligible difference that I wouldn't recommend it. Overall, we have a pretty clean unwrap on this one, and we're going to end up having to join these together anyway, so let's just go ahead and take care of this one. Let's add a new material. We're going to do that, and then this one's going to be really easy to add seams to. Select sharp edges, and let's go ahead and deselect these. There's a reason I'm deselecting these. It's, like I said, just take that mini unwrapping course we made. It'll answer all your questions about different selection tricks, different tricks to unwrap. But for this area, I'm just going to deselect. The general trick is you can unmark edges along spans of faces when you're adding a seam. So we're going to unmark those and press Control E to mark a seam on this area. And you're going to see we have a pretty clean unwrap on this part. Now we probably don't need the seam here on the top, so I'm going to select a face, and then you can select any of them. Shift G and then coplanar, and then we're going to press Control E and clear the seam that way, and that way we won't actually have a seam here. And yeah, there you go. We have a really nice unwrap on this object, no problem at all. And we do, of course, have our triangulation behind the scenes. All right, awesome. So now what we need to do is join these two together. So whenever we join these two together, it's going to overwrite whatever modifier we're joining from to. So if I join this one to this one, it's going to take over the data on this one. So they're all identical. We all have the same size and same operations going on. So I can easily press Control J to join these together. And why did it collapse? Does the triangulation... Oh no, I have a weird modifier in here. I have no clue how that happened. Anyways, let's try it again. Control J, there we go. And now we're going to unwrap everything together because right now we have overlapping islands from these being unwrapped separately. So we're going to press the U key and then unwrap. You're going to see we have a full unwrap on both of these, which is really cool. And you could either use Blender's Packer right here, or you could use UV Pack Master, which is generally a much better algorithm. Like I said, there's just limited space on this one, so you could just keep chopping it up if you wanted to. It just depends on what you want to do. There are additional ways to optimize the UV space, share space that's mirrored. There's so many different tricks that I can't possibly present in this video. We have a full game asset course already out on our website if you want to take that. We make 2 game assets and we go a lot more into detail on these different tricks. But for a basic, simple beginner tutorial, this is totally fine. We're going to leave it how it is. If you want to learn more, I'll have the appropriate links in the description. So I'm just going to see, this is probably the best pack we're going to get. But as you can see, we have a really clean unwrap on this object. No issues at all. This is a little bit skewed down here. So I guess if you wanted to, you could drop a seam here to fix that. But either way, looks pretty good. Anyways, this video's went on long enough. So in the next video, we're going to basically finish everything up. We need to export the high poly, which means we need to do some triangulations on the high poly as well. The low poly, it's basically done. We're ready to export that right now if we wanted to. And we also need to bake out our normal map in Marmoset. So we'll do all that in the next video. We're not going to be doing texturing because texturing is simple enough. You can watch the millions of tutorials out there, however many. But you will have the proper file export ready to just bring it straight into Substance Painter, whatever, and texture it yourself. So we'll have all that done in the next video, part 3. So keep a lookout. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't, then you'll get notified that way. That's about it for this video. See ya.